Well, good afternoon, everyone, and thank you so much for joining us this afternoon. I'm pleased to stand alongside Jason Nixon, Minister of Seniors, Community and Social Services, Mike Ellis, Minister of Public Safety and Emergency Services, Dan Williams, who is our Minister of Mental Health and Addictions, Dale McFee, Chief of Police for Edmonton Police Service. Unfortunately, Chief Cody Thomas couldn't be with us today because he has a cabinet meeting at the moment, but he has been essential in the initiative we're going to be talking about this afternoon. But we're here to share updates about the good work that has been accomplished at the Edmonton Navigation and Support Centre in only 2 months. Most Albertans will never experience the pain and hardship of living on the street in one of our cities, but we can imagine how difficult it must be, being exposed to the elements, having no stability or security, and seeing no easy way out of it. Unfortunately, this has become a reality for far too many people in Edmonton. We've seen dozens of homeless encampments spring up in marginal spaces and on city streets all over our provincial capital. But this isn't just an Edmonton issue. We're seeing it in cities across Alberta and indeed across Canada. The rising cost of living, a lethal addiction crisis, and a decreased housing supply have all contributed to a major increase in homeless encampments in recent years. And let me be clear, these are dangerous places, especially for women and people with disabilities. Albertans staying in encampments have died in fires or from drug overdoses. Others have been assaulted, sexually abused, robbed, and exploited. Some of these encampments are controlled by gangs. No one should ever have to live like this. We're Albertans and we look after each other. We won't turn our backs on some of Alberta's most vulnerable citizens. We won't turn a blind eye to the criminals who prey on them, and we won't allow misery and despair to have a home in our cities. Enabling encampments is not compassion, it's cruelty, it's indifference to suffering, it's giving up, and that's not something that our government can support. It's what we saw happening in Edmonton last fall, rising crime and gang-related activity in encampments. That's why I created an emergency cabinet committee last November. It was clear to me that it was time for a cabinet-level response to address the increasingly dangerous situation. We brought 7 ministries together and we invited members of the Edmonton Police Service and Grand Chief Tody Thomas from the Confederacy of Treaty 6 First Nations to join us. Together, we worked to mount a quick and decisive response to the issue of encampments. And I want to thank every member of the committee for their ongoing tireless and compassionate work. Thanks to those efforts, we were able to stand up the Navigation and Support Centre to provide a safe central location where people exiting encampments can access the services they need to break the cycle and rebuild their lives. As part of our recovery-oriented system of care, the Navigation and Support Centre brings existing services under one roof. So those who formerly stayed in encampments and anyone else experiencing homelessness in Edmonton can more quickly and simply access the supports they need. Many of us take for granted the knowledge of where to go for which services, but that's just not the case for many in the homeless population. So we did what we could to change that and staff the centre with people who could guide those from the encampments to addiction treatment, housing and shelter supports, and Indigenous supports. We ensured that they could get proper medical care for their wounds, and we helped them get the ID they needed so that accessing supports in the future will be easier. When we created this centre, our government committed to evaluating its operations every 30 days to ensure its continued effectiveness. And I'm pleased to say that in the short time so far, the Navigation and Support Centre has had a big impact. We've heard a lot of touching stories about people getting the help they need at the centre. I'd like to share one such story with you today. In one case, a man and his dog came to the centre from an encampment. Since he was unable to part with his dog, both of them ended up staying at the centre for about 4 days. And during that time, he got ID, he got his income support file updated, he met with a housing worker, he then left the centre to stay with some family. And about 2 days after he left, he came back with 5 people he'd rounded up from the West End who were all staying outdoors and needed help. I want to say a huge thank you to those frontline workers at the support centre, to the incredible shelter employees and volunteers in the city, and to centre clients for putting their trust in this supportive measure. The centre and this work shows that our keys to success are working with partners, making strategic investments, and better coordinating our existing services. This is how we can end encampments and help Albertans experiencing homelessness to change their lives. It's the kind of common sense made in Alberta solution that our province prides itself on. And it's why we'll open a similar centre in Calgary. We are working on that right now. Now I'd like to invite Minister Jason Nixon up to share more.
Well, thank you, Premier. I'm pleased to be here today with all of you to provide an update on the success of the Edmonton Navigation Support Centre. For the last several years, homelessness has become a topic of increased concern in our capital city. In fall of 2023, we received disturbing reports from the Edmonton Police about crime, exploitation, and dangerous conditions in encampments across Edmonton. There were cases of people being burnt to death and overdoses in tents, people being abused by gangs. While Alberta's government increased the capacity of the Edmonton shelter system to a record 1,800 spaces to make sure that there was availability within our system, it was clear that a special approach was needed to get support directly to the people living in dangerous encampments. That is why this January, Alberta's government opened up a new navigation support centre to provide support for Edmonton's most vulnerable. Our goal was simple: to put supports around each individual coming out of an encampment to get them to a safe environment with the help that they needed. Our approach: create a single location for people coming out of encampments to connect with government supports, services, and agencies. The Navigation Centre brings together teams from across the social services sector, including government divisions and our nonprofit and Indigenous partners. Together, the different stations at the centre provide services ranging from printing government ID and financial supports to connecting individuals with addiction treatment and housing. When we launched the Navigation Centre, we committed to reviewing and sharing its results. I'm pleased to share that this Navigation Centre model has exceeded our expectations in its first 2 months of operation. Since opening in mid-January, more than 700 people have accessed the centre, and more than 2,200 referrals for services and direct connections have been made to services including housing, health supports, addiction recovery, and Indigenous supports. This includes over 450 pieces of ID being issued, nearly 300 people being connected with financial benefits, and over 200 visits with on-site community healthcare workers. There has also been nearly 550 connections made to shelter and housing programs since the centre opened. The individuals coming through the Navigation Centre have come from encampments, but are also now dropping by because they have been told through word of mouth about the opportunities presented at the centre. With its success to date, Alberta's government is committed to continuing the Navigation Centre model here in Edmonton. In addition, we will be expanding this concept into Calgary to help address the needs of the homeless population in that city. Conversations are ongoing between Alberta's government, officials in the city of Calgary, and our partners, and I look forward to sharing more details about the new centre in Calgary in the coming months. The greatest success, though, of the Navigation Centre is not the number of IDs printed or the referrals made. It is the life-changing impact that having these services together in a single location is having on the lives of people living in encampments. I want to share one story in particular that had a major impact on me and the staff at the centre. A few weeks ago, an Indigenous woman entered the Navigation Centre from an encampment. Upon arrival, she asked to be reconnected with her sister in a small northern Alberta town. Workers reached out to the woman's sister and found out that the woman's family had believed that she had been missing and likely dead for over a decade. Within hours, this individual was provided with ID, enrolled in financial benefits, and her sister picked her up from Edmonton to bring her to an addiction recovery treatment close to home. Without the Navigation Centre's work, this family likely would not have been reunited, and this individual would not be getting the support she needs to live a full and healthy life. Stories like these, and there are countless others, are why Alberta's government will be expanding the Navigation Centre to Calgary and continuing this approach in our capital city. In closing, I want to thank the many people who have made this a success. First, to Chief McFee, I want to thank you and the Edmonton Police Service for raising this issue with the government and being a critical partner with the social services sector in this process. Thank you, of course, to our Indigenous partners, led by Grand Chief Thomas, who are playing a critical role both in the Navigation Centre and in the operation of Indigenous-led shelter options in Edmonton. Thank you as well to the government staff from Seniors Community and Social Services, Service Alberta, Mental Health and Addictions, and the Department of Health, who have worked tirelessly setting up and working at this centre. And of course, a big thank you to our nonprofit partners who spend every day on the front lines to connect directly with people who are in need. We could not have done this, nor the work that we do, without that close partnership. By continuing to operate the Navigation Centre, more and more Albertans will have access to a safe environment to get supports. Alberta's government will not abandon the most vulnerable among us to die in tents. Instead, we will connect with them, resources that they need, and safe places to stay. The results are clear. This approach is working. And with that, I'd like to say thank you again and ask Minister Mike Ellis, Deputy Premier Mike Ellis, to come up and provide a few remarks.
Well, thank you very much, Minister Nixon. Back in January, Alberta's government announced the Support Navigation Centre because fellow Albertans urgently needed our help. For months, Edmonton's downtown has faced mounting issues of rising homelessness coupled with the cruel cycle of addiction, exploitation, and crime that preys on it. The reason we opened the Support Navigation Centre is because too many Albertans are living in dangerous conditions and are being preyed upon by organized crime. The visible hardship is both heartbreaking and daunting. These living conditions are unsafe, and these encampments are gang-run drug camps that promote drug usage, crime, and violence. They are not safe places to sleep or live, full stop. Edmonton Police Service and media have recently reported instances of organized crime and gang members infiltrating encampments and exploiting vulnerable people and staying there. But we most confront these challenges, and we do what we can to bring vulnerable Albertans to safety because they are still our neighbors. And they are suffering in the dangerous predatory conditions of these encampments. The navigation and support centers opened in January continue to address the immediate needs of Albertans impacted by encampment removals and connect these people to same-day wraparound supports, including detox, medical treatment, as well as addiction and mental health counseling. After review, to see that these targeted supports remain in place and to support the community. Removing these encampments has been a key first step in routing the gangs and violent criminals that have crept into our communities, extorted, exploited, and abused our neighbors in crisis. Encampments will never be the answer to solving homelessness. It's our hope that the immediate and comprehensive wraparound services offered by the Support Navigation Centre, which opened roughly 2 months ago, will continue to open a path to recovery for many Albertans who need and deserve our compassion and support and who want help. As I said, when we first opened the Navigation Centre, our most vulnerable deserve our support to break this cycle of abuse and violent gangs. They have no place in our city and are not welcome here. The Navigation Centre will continue to help us achieve that. And with that, I would like to invite Chief McFee to the podium. Thank you.
Thank you, Deputy Premier. Tansei, good afternoon, everyone. I want to thank Premier Smith, Deputy Premier Ellis, Minister Nixon, Grand Chief Thomas, Minister Williams, but also to everybody in the government staff that's worked as hard to get to where we are today. Last time when this group stood together, I said that it was time for action, that fighting for the status quo, for people's right to live in encampments fraught with dangerous and violent conditions instead of fighting for their right to security and stability was a disservice to their humanity. Today, I'm glad to say that we've not only taken action, but that it's working. As we begin to see the evidence, the unprecedented number of referrals and direct connections to services and the dwindling numbers of large entrenched encampments, we know we're working in the best interest of the vulnerable and the larger community. Since the opening of the Navigation and Support Centre and our joint encampment approach, there have been no fatal tent fires. No fatal tent fires. No overdose deaths in encampments. Edmontonians have not been burning or freezing to death in tents. Stop and stop. Instead, they're getting mental health, addiction, addiction treatment, housing, cultural supports, all of the solutions long needed for long-term success, which we've always known. That is what empathy looks like. That is what it means to treat people with compassion. When we have members of the vulnerable community coming to our officers asking in their own volition to go to the centre because they've heard about other success, we know we're probably on the right track. In fact, the majority of people now arriving at the Navigation Centre are not brought there by police. They're seeking out the services themselves. 3 months ago, we didn't see this rate of uptake in interest in services. As you heard Minister Nixon say, with centralized services and a joint approach, the referral numbers coming to the Navigation Centre are now in the thousands. For our help teams, which have been instrumental in bringing people at the centre, to the centre, they've noticed a higher rate of success for their clients. With everything in one place, there are fewer barriers, more efficiency being seen by the service provider, decision makers in one place. What's more, the further along we are in the operations, the less encampment displacement we're seeing. While there are certainly those that choose to move along the locations instead of going to the navigation center, this is decreasing week to week. Encampments are smaller, fewer in numbers, less dispersed across the city. It's worth noting that we have not seen an increase of people relocating to the river valley like some have said. In fact, we've had our drones and other things in the air looking to ensure that we're finding people, and that's just not the case. This suggests a positive habit change, one that means seeking services and staying connected to supports and becoming the norm over living in encampments. Last week, from Health, we also heard from Alberta Health Services Shigella Task Force that new cases have dropped from double to single digits since the start of our expedited approach. They went from a high in 20 new cases in mid-December to 1 in mid-March. These are all encouraging signs. But make no mistake, there's still lots of work to do. With summer around the corner, more people will be choosing to live outdoors due to warmer temperatures. That said, we have a blueprint for success that holds true regardless of the season. This is the foundation of a permanent approach, one that takes all the needs of the individual into consideration for better outcomes. Not outputs, outcomes. Saying that this is simply a housing matter when the evidence tells us that it's much more than that is minimizing the full scope of what's actually needed to effect lasting change. This approach can and should be the norm. With fewer encampments, we're disrupted a criminal intelligence landscape that once thrived in obscurity. Those extorting, abusing, and preying on our neighbors in crisis now have fewer places to hide and operate with anonymity. And it's easier for police to intervene and hold them accountable. From the beginning of January to the end of February, calls for service in the city of Edmonton's identified encampment areas, which is predominantly downtown, have dropped by almost 9% across all violent and non-violent categories. Citywide, over the same time frame within the same categories, it's decreased by 6.5%. That, when you're taking hundreds of thousands of calls that we do every year, is significant, and that is a lot less victimization. When we look at those two numbers together, this means we are not seeing the crime displacement that some predicted we would. There are greater and faster reductions in areas like the downtown core and surrounding communities, but the entire city right now is trending downward. But again, there's still lots of work to do. We need to keep up this momentum. I want to thank all that joined with everybody here as being champions of change. The provincial government, our community partners, Grand Chief Thomas, the City of Edmonton, the Fire Rescue Services, including the former City Manager Andre Corbold, who was instrumental in making sure that we had everyone at the table, and I want to thank him for that. You committed to doing things differently so that our city can become a safer place, so that community safety and well-being continues to be the priority. The EPS will keep leading with empathy and accountability, staying tough on violent crime while working with community and service providers to address the root causes of mental health and addiction and trauma. Madam Premier, I just want to thank you for taking the leadership on this since day one. I can't thank you enough, and Edmontonians can't thank you enough when we start to see some of these differences. Thank you all for being here. Hi.
Thank you, Chief. Thank you, Ministers and Premier. We'll now go into the media Q&A portion of this announcement. We'll be starting off with questions here in the room. Of course, we'll be going with one question, one follow-up. Please state your name and outlet before asking your question, and then we'll head over to the phones. We'll go to the first at the mic.
Hello, Duncan Kinney with the Progress Report. This guy's on the way. Hello, Daniel. One of the foundational kind of reasons given for this kind of encampment mega sweep is sexual assault. One of the anecdotes that both Chief McFee's lawyer and Danielle Smith have used, Danielle, you used it in a private dinner with the Ranchman's Club, was the tale of a young man who was sexually assaulted by 3 men. That story was used in open court by the EPS to justify their encampment sweep. You again told it to a crowd of elites at the Ranchman's Club about justifying this encampment mega sweep. That person has come forward and said they don't believe they were sexually assaulted by homeless people. I've also sent a letter to you from this person asking if and I'm going to ask it to you again. Will you honor their request of this young nurse who was sexually assaulted and stop talking about their case?
Well, I'm certainly not talking about the case. It was, as you noticed, just brought up by you. I have talked about a number of other cases. There's lots of reasons for why we address this issue, and I think the fact that we have 700 connections to over 2,200 services, it proves out why it is we needed to do this. The chief can tell you any number of stories about violence that occurred, about deaths that occurred. And so, I'd be happy to turn it over to him so he can give you a couple of other examples. But it was becoming very, very obvious that it was just frankly too dangerous for us to continue to allow these incidents to continue to occur. So let me just turn it over to the chief. Okay.
My follow-up, from who or where did you learn that it was a young nurse? Sorry, from who or where did you learn that it was a young nurse that had been sexually assaulted? That detail hadn't been revealed publicly. And also, from who or where did you learn that their sexual assault was part of a gang initiation, as was caught on tape, you telling these people?
In respecting the individual's wishes, I'm just not going to.
I'm asking where you learned the information from, not more details about the case.
Look, we had a cabinet committee meeting, and we have a number of people who are on that cabinet call. We have 7 ministers. We had the chief of police. We had several staff members. I can't recall specifically, but I'm certainly not going to repeat the trauma of that individual by continuing to talk about his case.
Thank you.
Thank you, Duncan.
Jonathan Bradley, Western Standard. While this announcement focuses on navigation centres in Edmonton and Calgary, it does not cover those in other parts of Alberta. Where do you stand on opening navigation centres in other places outside of Edmonton and Calgary?
Well, look, we will open them wherever the numbers warrant, and it does seem that there is some interest in Calgary on working with us on developing a navigation centre there. I can let Minister Nixon tell you a little bit about the progress on that. It could be that in other mid-sized communities that there is another approach that we can take, but generally speaking, I think what we've discovered with Edmonton, that the single point of access to allow people into a centre that can give them multiple services is a model that should be replicated. It may well be that we run it directly in large centres like Calgary and Edmonton, because that makes a lot of sense with the high volumes. It could well be in smaller centres like the community I represent, Medicine Hat, that we find an agency that is already working in collaboration and we deputize them to help do this service on our behalf. But what we want to do is make sure that we're rolling out a model in the way that we know works. It worked in Edmonton. We hope it will we'll also have the similar success in Calgary. Let me turn it over to Minister Nixon so he can tell you if we're contemplating it anywhere else.
Thanks, Premier. I would say that as we get out of the 2 largest cities, there will be some needs that change just based on population numbers in the homeless population. But the techniques that we're learning from the Navigation Centre, we will be repeating in communities that are smaller than Edmonton and Calgary. We already are. For example, Lethbridge, which would probably be our 3rd largest homeless population in the province. We are already doing similar techniques with the Blood Department of Health in our emergency homeless shelter in that community. As the communities get smaller and smaller, as the Premier said, to some of the communities that her and I have the privilege of representing from rural Alberta, obviously a large navigation centre in a population that may have 2 or 3 homeless people will not be a way to go, but we will be working to connect with other organizations in that community to use the same level of wraparound supports to be able to try to help the individuals that find themselves homeless in those communities.
Okay, my follow-up question pertains to an off-topic matter, and it's for Minister Williams. So we've seen growing evidence of the impact of diversion of safe supply in British Columbia with multiple seizures by the RCMP of these drugs in places such as Prince George and Campbell River, which it has said has been trafficked to other jurisdictions. You've been warning of this for some time and called on the Canadian government to implement unique chemical identifiers to trace the diversion of safe supply. What is your opinion on the evidence of this diversion, and why has the Canadian government not adopted your proposal for unique chemical identifiers?
Well, first of all, safe supply is illegal in Alberta, but we can only do so much if the federal government is funding $100 million plus into safe supply in neighboring provinces that stream over the border into Alberta. Why do I think they're not taking the advice and request? Well, their stated reason is because they think that they're not sure if it's possible. That's curious given that the FDA for a decade now has had this protocol out for-profit pharmaceutical companies to protect their profits and their economic interests. The government of Canada seems reluctant to use that same technology to protect the lives of the most vulnerable and our communities and our families. The real reason, I think they're afraid. I think they're afraid of where it will lead, of the legal liability, of the moral liability, of having dumped millions upon millions of high-powered opioid drugs onto the streets, that they'll be found in autopsies. I think they're afraid that they'll be found to be a part of drug seizures, not just in British Columbia, but across the country. And all that would be evidence-based policymaking, which they seem to be allergic to. In this jurisdiction, we will defend the vulnerable in our province. And right now, that means standing up to Justin Trudeau and the NDP coalition that are pumping millions upon millions of high-powered drugs across the country. And our suggestion, if they want to take it seriously, is to use evidence, to use the data, and show where the harm is coming from. That's what this policy would enable.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Hi, Paige Parsons with CBC. My first question is for Minister Nixon. You mentioned over 500 shelter and housing connections, but how many people have actually are successfully in housing now as a result of the navigation
Well,
center?
550 of the 700 who went through the navigation center are all housed. Some of those, about half have went into transitional housing at the moment, are working into long-term housing programs, and the other half are currently housed within our emergency shelter system and utilizing it to stay safe and working through their programs within that system.
Okay, thank you. My next question is for the Premier. You mentioned wanting to end the misery on Edmonton Street, but we know from Boyle Street Community Services that they've been notified of almost a death in the first, almost a daily death in the first 78 days of 2024, even, with this new navigation center being opened. Is the province considering funding for Boyle Street Community Services or for the Bissell Center, which are two agencies that have been doing, for years, like really critical outreach for this population that, they're maybe not dying in camps, but they are still dying on the streets?
Look, let me hand that over to Minister Nixon again, because we do already fund those agencies through different mechanisms, so I want him to be able to explain that. And the other part was that we knew we needed to have a shelter system that was open 24/7. And so with the addition of some of the additional supports that we've got there, we know that we have an opportunity to make sure that somebody always has a place to go, as well with the navigation center. It has really changed the dynamic of being able to connect people to services. But the reason we're doing this is because of the deaths on the street. Back before COVID, I believe there were only 30 deaths or so in that year. And now we were up to over 300 last year. That's the entire reason why we knew that we had to do something, that we just couldn't continue to see those numbers go up. And so we're hoping, we started this process at the beginning of this year. We'll have a better sense at the end of the year about whether we're able to address that particular issue. But make no mistake, this opioid crisis is a devastating crisis, and we've begun to see those numbers climb in the last 6 or 7 years. They've stabilized. Sometimes they've gone down. Sometimes they've gone up again. It's going to be an ongoing battle, and we just have to keep trying new ways of addressing it. But let me ask Minister Nixon to talk particularly about those two programs.
Yeah, and I might get Chief McFee to supplement about the differences maybe with some of the organizations that we work with to do this work. But as the Premier said, both Boyle and Bissell receive millions of dollars in funding from the Alberta government through our community-based organization that we fund, which would be Homeward Trust. And the programs that are in question were the day-use shelter space that was created by the City of Edmonton as we worked to create the new emergency shelter system that we have in place now. We now have 1,800 24-hour-a-day, 7-day-a-week shelter spaces in the province. And so that's where we are utilizing those day spaces now within that shelter system. But we will continue to work with all our nonprofits within the City of Edmonton to be able to help with work like outreach and to be able to help connect everybody that we can to services. The other thing I do want to say is that while none of us' position is that the Navigation Center makes the drug epidemic go away, what our position is, and it's been proven to be true, is that living in tents taking deadly chemicals is a very good way to end up dead. And is not an appropriate place for us as the government to allow people that are in vulnerable conditions to live. And it is certainly more safe to be within the navigation center and our shelter system.
So sorry, the province isn't planning to pick up the stopgap funding that the city was covering, because the city is now saying that's a provincial responsibility and they should be covering it.
Well, again, the province funds both those organizations to the tune of multi-million dollars a year.
Yeah, I mean, just a little bit of a different, I'm not going to speak to obviously the funding page and this, but I had this question the other day, and I'm a bit miffed how we know how many deaths there's been in the last 2 months, when I think the medical examiner's office takes 2 months to get those out. And it's not been 2 months. I mean, that would take us back to December. So I don't want to say that's right or wrong, because I don't know. I think, as articulated by the minister, it's not going to end the opioid, but it gives us a lot better chance of connecting them and to reduce it. But there's deaths in all kinds of different addictions right now that I think we also got to take notice of. We're certainly reducing the violence, and I think this one-dimensional approach that we've been talking about for some time, if there's ever been more evidence that came in here over the last couple of months, is it doesn't work, and we need to do things differently. But I think the other thing that you just mentioned, which is I think a larger question, is why do we have so many numbers, and who's responsible for putting the numbers out, and why are the numbers all different? When we started this, I heard there was 3,000 homeless people. I can tell you right now, and the person running that for us, we haven't even seen close to that. We have some different things happening in the shelters. We have some of our immigrant population that are obviously in needs of affordable housing. We have an addictions crisis with 200 to 300 to 400 people. When you start adding those all up, it still doesn't add to 3,000. So I think you're onto another story there that would be interesting to see who's actually responsible for the numbers, and can we actually get one set of numbers that we can all work from rather than blaming everybody else.
Chief, because I know this came up the other week with my colleague, but those numbers for 2024, Boyle Street's being notified mostly by Edmonton Police when one of their community members died. So that's where they're getting those numbers.
But we don't determine what the cause of death
No,
is.
and no one's saying what the cause of death is. It's just the homeless people who have died this year.
So we're determining that they were homeless as well, or is that cross-reference to Boyle Street? Like
it's cross.
My whole
Boyle
point
Street
is
clients,
we need one sense. I'm not saying they're wrong, and I think I articulated that at the start, but I think we also got to use the medical examiner as that key person or key point that actually gets us in the right place, if that makes sense.
Thanks.
Hello, everyone. Morgan with Global. I think this will be a question for Minister Nixon, but everyone feel free to weigh in. It seems that a lot of what the Navigation Centre offers could be seen as mirroring what local agencies offer as well. So I'm wondering if you could, the argument could be made that the province is doubling up on a lot of things that are available. So why the Navigation Centre instead of funds being directed to those historical nonprofits?
Well, I don't think that we're doubling up on services. I think what we've learned with the Navigation Centre is that we have a lot of the services that we need to work with this population is already taking place within the government or with one of our nonprofit partners in the social services sector. What we've learned, though, is that with this population, it's hard to connect them to those services unless we bring it all together. And so what's taken place in the Navigation Centre is now an individual can come for help, whether they've came from an encampment being closed or now they're coming right off the streets, and everything is right there, and we can now bring the full force of our resources to bear to help that individual. And I can tell you that as I've interacted with homeless individuals in the Navigation Centre, they're often shocked how many services were available. But now they don't have to try to go around the city of Edmonton trying to locate all those services. We can help keep care of it all in one spot. So I think that's really the key. And I will tell you, one of the things that we will be talking about as we make the Navigation Centre permanent is how we can use it to be able to reach into our existing emergency shelter system, whether bringing people from the shelter system temporarily into that Navigation Centre to have wraparound supports around them, or bringing the Navigation Centre into the shelter system. But we'll be looking at that as we stabilize this encampment situation in the coming weeks. Yeah. So, and I'm going to get Mr. Williams to supplement some of the addiction services that are within it, within the Navigation Centre. But for those of you who have not been there, I know you've been there. When you arrive, first off, you'll be safe, warm, provided food, place to have a shower. Maybe you're not ready to talk to somebody about help yet. You could have a nap or like a safe place to sleep. But once you're ready to start, there's all those stations are right there in a row, and you just start to go through it. So you can arrive, you can get your ID, and then you're off to where you can get prescriptions if you need them filled, or then you maybe need a medical check. There's a private place for that to be able to take place. Our financial support people are there, and you can just go from station to station to station with workers who can help you get what you need. And so these are individuals who may have left an encampment, who are now have arrived and within hours have received medical services, replace their ID, which is a real critical thing for the homeless population, as I know that you know. and then be able to get access to back meds, like their medications that they may not have had in a while, access to housing supports, and then all out, not the old way, which would have been some social worker maybe in a shelter giving them a list of all the places in the city and asking them to get to them.
Yeah, on the addiction front, addiction is fundamentally a disease of isolation. That's what it grows out of, isolation and trauma. And so having a navigation center like this, even though there may be access to resources elsewhere, is where we see the wins we wouldn't otherwise have. One example of this is an individual in February, he was in his mid-70s, was living homeless on the street. And he ended up going to the navigation center. As a result of it, ended up on Sublocade, which is the preferred and evidence best-based opioid agonist therapy. This individual had multiple instances of emergency department and EMS responses because of overdoses in his mid-70s. The most interesting part of that, in spite of all the advertising we have around the virtual opioid dependency program in the downtown core area and the knowledge of it, over 8,000 Albertans, approximately 8,000 Albertans get access to it, are currently clients of VODP. He had never heard of it. Since February, over 2 months, there's been no instance of an emergency department or an EMS response because of overdose for this mid-70-year-old man. Talk about someone that Albertans want to help and support, who's the most vulnerable. So it's not about reproducing. It's about breaking down those barriers of isolation that inevitably exist in the deadly disease of addiction and overcoming them by the government aggressively and very zealously trying to give services to everyone who needs them.
And I do have another question, but Chief, do you mind just supplementing? What's the status of the number of encampments in Edmonton? I know it's difficult to keep track of, but do you have like a rough estimate for us?
I can tell you that we've cleared 761 sites as of today, 761 structures. We estimate as of this morning there is another 28 that we need to deal with in various locations of our city. You know, and there's a whole list here, 702 unique visitors, you know, the transportation and stuff that we certainly can give you the numbers. But the whole point of this is, as we've heard, the numbers aren't as big as some have led us on to believe. The reality is, and they're getting smaller every day, and that's a win, and people are getting connected to services. You know, I went out and worked a few days there, and my deputy is out there quite often. It's not conducive when somebody's in the state that a lot of the individuals that are struggling are in, to be looking after themselves in a plastic tent in the middle of winter, and we all have seen the fires and everything else. We all talk about why we do this. The reason is because it's the right thing to do. Stop and stop. And we can say that, why didn't we do this before? That's a good question, but we didn't. But now we are. And the point is rather than argue about going back to something that didn't work, how do we double down to make this better is the real question that we're actually exploring right now. So you just have to drive around. There's not a lot. It doesn't mean that we don't have some folks that are struggling. And until we get some type of health thing, that whether in AACP is a believer in some type of health intervention, you know, I know compassion intervention or whatever, we need a health solution for those 200 or 300 that actually can get them the ability to succeed as well. But these aren't big numbers for a city of 1.1 million. And I think we got to realize if we can't solve this, it's because we don't have the right people in the room or we're listening to the wrong people.
Thanks, Chief. Then follow up for the Premier, different topic, carbon tax. We hear 4 premiers, including yourself, are testifying at a House of Commons committee this week on the carbon tax.
Yeah.
Just tell us more about it. What's your plan? What are you hoping to chat about?
Well, look, I mean, when we look at the inflation crisis that we have, the affordability crisis that we have, and the fact that the constant layering on of federal taxes is adding to that, we have asked at a minimum that they just not increase the tax on April the 1st. When you think about a couple of things, number one, most provinces have a fuel tax to help pay for roads. We're no exception. Even the federal government has a fuel tax to help pay for roads. That's 10 cents. On top of that, they will have another 17 cents for a carbon tax. On top of that, they charge GST on all of that, which adds an extra 2 cents on top for additional GST of tax on tax. And people have had enough. People want to be able to see their cost of living go down. We're seeing that in some small measure. But the problem that we have with the approach that they're taking is that when they tax small businesses, they don't rebate to small businesses. So the small businesses have to work those prices into the cost of everything that they sell, which then it fuels the inflation issues, which then has the Bank of Canada saying inflation's not cooled off enough yet, so we can't reduce interest rates. And if you can't reduce interest rates now when people are going to get their mortgages renewed, it also impacts them there. The other part of the problem is the unfair treatment on the on home heating fuel. Keep in mind, in Alberta, we made the decision, I believe in Lougheed's day, to move away from higher emissions types of fuels to natural gas, which was the clean burning fuel at that time. And so it's part of the reason why us in Alberta and in Saskatchewan are so dependent on natural gas, is we made that early decision. And so instead, the federal government stepped in and they gave a reprieve for 3 years to Atlantic Canadians, and have done nothing to help reduce the burden on residents in the rest of the country. And keep in mind how bad this is. When that fuel tax on natural gas goes up on April the 1st, it'll be over $4 a gigajoule. Gas right now is selling at, I believe, $1.72 a gigajoule. So the tax is more than double what people are paying for the base price of fuel. And those are two of the big cases that we're going to make. It's just that the combination of the extra cost on home heating, the extra cost as well on transportation fuel, we just think that the federal government, at a bare minimum, should just not increase the tax.
Do you think with 4 premiers testifying it'll be fruitful?
I hope so. I mean, I think it's, we all come from different perspectives. We've got, I believe myself and Scott Moe, people know where we're coming from on it. I believe Tim Houston and Blaine Higgs are the other two. So to get the perspective of provinces in both the East and the West, I hope it does have some impact on the committee.
And we'll take one more here from the room and take one from the lines if we have time here. Go ahead, Charles.
Charles Lyle, Radio-Canada Alberta. This is for Premier Smith or Minister Nixon.
Minister Williams speaks French, so would you like him to respond en français as well?
Perhaps, yeah.
Okay.
In the grand scheme of what's been going on in Edmonton, have you guys put enough resources in the Navigation Center when looking at all the other people that might need it?
So I'll say it, and then Mr. Williams could say it in French again if you'd like. We certainly have put a significant amount of resources into the Navigation Center in the short term, and today we're committing to continue that investment in the Navigation Center in the city of Edmonton and to expand into Calgary. So we're very comfortable with the resources. The Premier made very clear to me before Christmas that we need to get this job done. We brought forward a plan to Treasury Board. Treasury Board approved it. And we put significant investments into make sure the Navigation Center will work. I also want to point out, we also put a significant investment into supporting the police and cleaning up some of the mess that came as a result of this. We cleaned up 129 tons of garbage already, something like 4,000 used needles. And so that investment has paid off. I think if you take a drive around downtown Edmonton, you'll see that that money has been well spent to be able to get Edmonton moving forward. We will expect the City of Edmonton to continue that work now that we've helped maintain this emergency, but we will continue to fund the Navigation Center going forward.
And my follow-up,
En français?
Oh oui, en français.
Oui, j'essaierai quand même.
Merci.
Alors, oui, aujourd'hui, c'est une journée qu'on veut assurer les Albertains que nous sommes communautaires continuer pour les ressources, pour le centre de navigation. Nous avons déjà une partnership avec la police ici et on s'est donné les ressources à eux pour continuer pour ramasser les débris après tous les encampements.
Merci. And my follow-up, just in regards to Boyle Street and the city saying that they're not really going to be funding that too much, will you be stepping in for day shelters in Edmonton?
We have day shelters in Edmonton, the most in the history of the province. We've opened up 1,800 full shelter space in the city of Edmonton that are open 24 hours a day, 7 days a week at the request of the city of Edmonton. We are not at capacity for those spaces, and we will obviously adjust if we end up anywhere in a space where we were at capacity, but on the coldest days we hover around 94, 95%. We watch it very closely. So I want to stress we already have day spaces. Both of those organizations receive funding for the work that they do, and we're happy to continue to work with them, but we are very satisfied and comfortable with our current emergency shelter system.
Thank you. And we have time for one last question. We'll go to the phones. Operator, can you put through the caller, please?
Carrie Tate, Globe and Mail. Hi, my question's for the Premier, and it's about agriculture. I'm wondering if you can give us a sense of how the province plans to manage water in the irrigation areas of the province, as the drought is right around the corner and seeding is right around the corner.
Yeah, we just actually had a robust discussion at Cabinet today, and Minister Schultz presented a series of options so that if we get into a situation where we need to declare an emergency, it'll be very clear some of the parameters where she would step in if she needs to help mitigate differences between various license holders. We certainly don't want to go there. We want to make sure that in areas where there is pressure that we're seeing a collaborative and voluntary approach to having the senior license holders able to share with some of the more junior license holders. But we just wanted to give her some direction and support in the event that she would have to step in with emergency measures. So I don't know what her plan is on the communications for when that is going to get out, but you'll see the details of that very soon. We just made the decision on that today.
And when you talked about sharing and a collaborative approach, the sort of the voluntary water sharing agreement deadline is coming up at March 31st. Do you expect to have voluntary agreements for water sharing on those key water basins?
I would say that everyone is hopeful that we're not going to need to go to emergency measures. I mean, we recognize there's a first in time, first in right system for water licenses. The longer you've had it, the more seniority that you get. But we do also recognize an expectation on the part of the public that human health, the animal welfare, as well as ensuring critical habitat for the species that use those waterways have got to take a priority. So that should give you some indication of what we're looking at. And if we can mitigate between those different water uses, if we do get into a crunch, we'd love to do it in a voluntary way, but the minister does have the discretionary power if she does need to step in and be more active in helping to ensure that the priorities are met.
Thank you, Carrie, and thank you, Premier. That'll conclude today's press conference.
Thanks, everyone.